Let's talk about the business of the day as it relates to theater with your hosts, Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. This is The Business of Theater, a working title. Mitch, I know we are looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater. The West End ain't ready for Miranda Priestley.
is Vanessa Williams ready for Miranda Priestley?
I think she is perfect
I think
casting.
she's a brilliant performer, and the entire success depends on the writing of that show because it's such an iconic movie. It's hard to improve upon it.
Well, she played a similar character in the comedy series Broad City.
Okay.
That was on Comedy Central, and she plays this owner who's just fabulous, high fashion. But in this case,
she's a stereotypic of her characters she plays, and that's the part that bothers me because Meryl. And I hate the comparison, but Meryl's is that we know Meryl's a sweetheart, and she just embodied that. And so Vanessa's like, I want to go, but I've already seen her do Spider-Woman. I've already seen her do whatever that Christmas Carol rock star thing on TV was that she did, where she played the horrible pop singer, in the middle. So I don't know. I'm hopeful because I like Vanessa Williams and I love the movie, but
they should work her song "Work to Do" in it.
But you know what else? though? You know who wrote the music?
Who wrote the music?
John. Yes. And that is what's going to talk me to want to go see it. That's an interesting thing because he's at the right age and perspective in life that I had to be a bitch in music. Yeah.
Yes. Who plays a wonderful bitch?
Yeah.
Anyway, that would be yes. So this is The Business of Theater, a working title. I am Darnell Radford, and let's get down to business. Hey Mitch.
Darnell, do you know we haven't talked in quite a while? We've lost our audience. I hope they what people find us interesting or helpful come back.
The good thing is we have a back catalog that anybody can listen to at any time. So thank you to our listeners who stick with us and realize that we don't do 10s and 12s.
Yeah. But also listeners,
so we take meaningful life breaks.
If you think we have anything to say, tell somebody to listen in. We're not trying to become viral necessarily, but it would be nice to increase our audience.
Yes, absolutely. And we have expanded our social media footprint, so you can find The Business of Theater on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram as well.
Yay.
And you can also email us at tbot@em3ry.com.
That's a lot to remember. That's
it's all in the
TBOT, so you can remember
TBOT.
You can remember that. And then his Emory 3 crap. Why there's a 3 in the middle there, which is so hard to understand. But
don't upset our business, Daddy.
Well, while we're talking about upsetting business,
they will pull us out of this studio in minutes. They're storming down the hall of the studio right now.
That's right.
Yes. So we did a New Year. We had a New Year chat, and then we took a little break because life happens.
Well, it was more than life, actually.
But we're back.
One of the things that I use January for, because I'm usually very project oriented in January, mostly because I can get some wonderful interns during that month. So I time everything
Mm.
that's going to need help to the month I can get these interns. This year
Yeah.
I canceled it all because I needed to reconceive the mission that of these
Mm.
projects, being that the theater industry across the country, um, in some cases, has completely disintegrated. In other cases, is changing, and in a few cases, is finding a new path. And I wanted to look at where all these paths are going and find out why there's so much resistance to thinking
Mm.
about the change. It's not, I understand if you can't, or if a theater company just likes what it does, but people don't even want to sit down and talk about it. And
Mm.
status quo is status quo. I always expect more from theater folk, and maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Mm. I
Silence.
don't know. I think everybody is still kind of hung up on, well, this worked before.
It didn't.
It's
It didn't.
I
Aha.
know.
There's the rub.
I know, but they felt better about a workflow in the past, and they're still trying to, and the funny thing is, if it didn't work then, they're still trying to make it work. And they're saying, like, what kind of tweaks can we do? Well, we have to abandon this
Well,
altogether.
or but
And
it's okay if they use this period of time to think of even the tweaks. They haven't.
hmm,
And I don't want to make a blanket saying, because there are a few
yeah.
theater companies that seem to be doing really interesting stuff, but
Hmm.
it seems like 95% of them aren't. And one of the things, I wasn't even planning to bring this up. I have spoken to so many younger people who are looking at the workload and the work hours that they are being asked to provide for, and
Hmm.
they're not even doing new theater. They're just taking shows,
Yeah.
we're doing Equus again, or we're doing this show, and they're wonderful shows, but they're killing themselves working sometimes through the night to get somewhere.
Hmm.
And that to me tells me whoever is leading those theaters is abandoning all civil responsibility. I worked for, I'm going to take blame. I was managing director of a theater company that at the moment shall remain nameless until I name it, Barrington Stage Company. Um, Loved the company. Loved the Julie Boyd, who was the artistic director, has retired, but loved so much about it. They were doing great work, but they were asking people to work sometimes 2 or 3 days without any sleep just to do their basic shows. Not year round, obviously, but it didn't make sense. Why are we doing that? That
Hmm.
we don't go to college or fall in love with theater to kill ourselves. Why shouldn't we be allowed to have a dinner with our family? Or, even on Broadway, not to be able to take an hour off and meet your relatives who have come in from out of town, have dinner with them, then they go to the show. I know as a Broadway manager, I couldn't even do that. There was so much
Yeah.
crisis management. Something isn't right. And yet, now I'm pontificating. But this is even with my union, when we talk about fixing the work conditions, they keep going, no one's going to listen to us. We'll get you a 3% raise on the next contract. And basically, you're stuck with the way it is. And that's the way they talk to the workers. Take the money
Hmm.
and run. And I had
Well,
never believed that. I think we have the responsibility to fix a few things.
it seems like they are trying to work with a budget that is unrealistic. It's like it seems like if you could alleviate the stress of your team by adding 2 more days that have a little bit more flexibility, maybe less
Mm-hmm.
hours, like that, wouldn't that ultimately be best for the production? And if you planned this last season when your budget was approved, you didn't if you didn't add an adequate buffer to allow for that, then you're holding yourself to an arbitrary, you know, standard that was
I
improperly
agree.
set.
No argument at all. And but along with that, first comes planning, which is part of the
Yeah.
structure. So, for example, there are two theater companies, I think. That's why I'm not going to name them because I've just read about them. I can't prove it. That instead of killing people in the last few days before a first preview, they have added a week of rehearsal up front. Now, that
Hmm.
won't work if they don't plan to make sure that we still don't have the last minute crises at the end, right? But if you schedule now, if you rethink how rehearsals are supposed to work, what scenes you're going to have done, when you do your dress rehearsal, if you can rethink that, plan it the right way, and then say, now let's create a budget around that, the amount of
Hmm.
money won't be significantly different because there's overtime involved at the end. So you move some of that to the week before. But it's about scheduling, it's about structural thoughts, it's about directors and actors and management saying, how do we better do this? My argument is, I don't know anybody that I've asked who's willing to talk about it. They're not even
Hmm.
willing to discuss it, with the exception of perhaps these two theaters. And I don't know if they're actually doing it.
I wonder if it has to do with contracts too, because I know we have definitely been in a spot where it's like, well, we're in between shows and we don't have the revenue that's coming
Right.
through as consistently as it does when we have something on our stage. And so, even though we are planning for the next show, we may not have the ready funds to start acting on those contracts because as soon as that contract is signed and sent back, we have like seven
Right. Well, there
days,
there are
and
two.
then we send the
I have
first
two
payments.
reactions to that. It seems to me, just
Hmm.
logically, let's not even worry about that we're stuck with contracts, and if just logically,
Yeah.
there are going to be times at a nonprofit theater in between shows. So, okay, how much does that cost you? Build it in. You
Hmm.
then know, or the other way around, you come up with things that will fill that time so that there is income. But that's harder to do because you never know about
Yeah.
your audience. The trick first, though, is how much money does it take to do things the right way? Step one, you have to figure out what is the right way. And that's the
Hmm.
part I'll argue about. I understand when people, a theater company's going to say, hey, we didn't get the donations we needed. The government didn't come through. We didn't get our grants. We're stuck. Well, then don't do things the way you were planning to, because then you really are hurting the people working for you. Change your plans. Work within, it's like people in their home. If you're on food stamps, you know how much money you have for food. So why would you go out and go to a giant steak dinner and use your credit card and build up a $10,000? I'm really going off the table here, aren't I? Go spend $10,000 on.
It's because you earned it.
There
Treat
you go.
yourself.
What you do is you, to the best of your ability, work within what you have. Nonprofits just go begging. And that to me is a wrong business plan. First, you tell me what you plan to do the correct way and tell me how much you need to do that. Then, if you can't figure out how to get that money, you either raise your prices and you tell your audience this is the only way we can do it,
Hmm.
or you find another way to get the money, or you change your plans. One of those three things. And I'm
Yeah.
tired, having been in charge of some of these theater companies. I'm waiting for someone to. We've had these discussions. I'm poo pooed all the time. The artistic director just wants to do what they want to do. And I don't care, just spend the money. That doesn't make logical sense. We're creating art, not just business, right? And
Mm.
so you can't just beg everyone, oh, here's a $30 ticket you paid for your show. Look how inexpensive we are. And then, oh, but I need you to give me a donation of $250. So now you just charged me $280 to see your damn show. That is not right. That's Broadway. So
Yeah.
how do we fix that? Go ahead, Darnell. I'm asking you. How do we fix that?
Well, I will say, before we come up with solutions, is that there are many times where I step outside of the situation and say, why don't we just, it seems like the common sense of it all is this, and it kind of is, but then there's a nuance to it, and you're right to say, the leadership wants to do what it wants to do, and there's a lot of things like there might be a commitment to having a certain price structure for
Mhm.
tickets no matter what, and it doesn't honestly reflect the actual cost of doing business. And so a lot of companies are doing that, whereas maybe before they started that initiative with some funding,
Mhm.
from a foundation, and then that funding went away, and they still want to continue it because, again, they don't realize they're in the business of educating their patrons, and their patrons, it's not their patrons' job or duty to condition the organization to never change
Thank you.
in order to satisfy what the patrons have come to
Well said.
expect.
Well said.
And so and so it does feel like a lot of conversations are just beholden to the patrons who, over the pandemic decided that something else was a safer bet and decided not to be your patron, for a period of time. And we're spending a lot of time trying to get those patrons back when those patrons have already moved
Well,
on.
now we're talking.
And you look at that as an opportunity to change. So I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, if you had 50 people who were very adamant about this one thing, and you keep doing it because you're satisfying that group who has been loyal and supportive, but they're not here anymore. And so you have an opportunity to change. The thing about any organization in any one period is that we have moments that are clear benchmarks in life. And as time passes, whether it's a season or a year, or a fiscal year, all of those present an opportunity for growth and change. And so if you continue and say, oh, everything was tough last season, but it'll be better this season, but we're not changing a
Mhm.
thing, then I don't know how it's going to be better this season. You're just winging it. That people will come out now. They were scared before. They had their reasons before, but I think people are more excited to come out now. But at the same time, I'm just going to use us for
Mhm.
example. We don't have a parking lot,
Right. Right.
right? And so if that was a concern before, it's still a concern because we don't have a parking lot. you know, so just because we help people figure out where to park doesn't mean we've actually solved the problem. We can't guarantee that they can park if they come see a show in our neighborhood. So somebody might be burned by that. I tried to come to your show. I was 15 minutes early. I circled the block 5 times, couldn't find anything. So I ultimately went to dinner
And there
instead.
is and there is something called, and I may have the wrong name of this. I think it's called the Jefferson effect, and that
Hmm.
is any change whatsoever works for up to 3 years to attract people. That works in
Hmm.
education, and it works. So, for example, if every year you said, "Okay, in 2025, we're going to find a parking lot somewhere nearby," if that's whatever goal, that's what you want to do. In 2024, we're going to add lemonade to the drinks we have at refreshment. Like every year, there's got to be something that says we are not at the finish line yet. We are growing. We may say, okay, this year we're only going to do small musicals. And that's what you do that year. The real trick
Mm-hmm.
to an audience, I have discovered, and I'm sure there are theater companies that will argue with me, if you have a hit, they will come. And for a
Mm.
lot of people, it's not about, oh, I want to go to the local theater. It's one, the local theater has made me very happy with what they have. Therefore, it's good stuff. But more importantly, I heard the second show that they have in their season, all the people who've seen it already are raving. You got to see it. You got to see it. Word of mouth. And all of a sudden, everyone in the community is trying to get a ticket. And guess what? The nonprofits don't raise their prices. It's, what
Mm.
happened to the demand, right? And the pricing is that would help pay for something else. You can't just say, give me money. We're still doing okay shows. But isn't that what most nonprofits do? We're doing good shows. There's nothing wrong with them. But, that's why so many shows in New York have to rely on celebrities. We're not actually selling you the show. We're selling you the fact that X person is in it and you just want to
Mm.
see a celebrity, which is a
Mm.
crappy reason to go see a show, in my opinion.
But which is also, what did I see recently?
Oh,
Uh,
I can't talk about the two shows I just saw that were awful.
no, not what did I see, but you were talking about, if there's a celebrity in it, they'll come. They're coming to
Mm-hmm.
see the celebrity. I had just seen Tom Holland's
Mm-hmm.
West End Romeo sells out in
There
two
you go. Right.
hours. It's just because they want to see Tom
Mm-hmm.
Holland. Doesn't matter what he's in, they will break
Yeah.
for it.
And by the way,
Yeah.
what that used to be Vegas, where you just knew who was giving you the show. Well, it still is.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go see
Yeah.
Usher when Celine Dion was there, Cher, whoever's going to be there. People go see the celebrity. When you see drama, it's okay to have a celebrity, but you're also seeing a
Yeah.
show, a story being told to you that ought to excite you, dancing, choreography,
Mm-hmm.
whatever is involved. Um, Sometimes the two just come to a perfect meeting, and that's when you get a super hit, right? And that's what you
Hmm.
have. And then, and this is the problem with Broadway right now. Well, it's not wrong word. I don't mean to imply it's bad.
The opportunity for Broadway.
Broadway, uh, when they talk about it's doing better, that's because we're
Mm-hmm.
Disneyland. We have
Mm.
Wicked, Lion King, Hamilton, um, Book of Mormon. These are shows that the tourists know about. They will buy a ticket. It has nothing to do with seeing artistic theater, seeing something new,
Yeah.
being emotionally involved in somebody's creative writing with great acting. That's not the tourist thing. And the only
Mm.
shows making money, wrong word only, almost only shows making money on Broadway are the theme park shows. That's what I call theme
Mm.
park shows. And they're good. I'm not arguing they're not worth seeing, but that's not making Broadway excite me. And so
Yeah.
I now look to the
Well.
nonprofit and regional
Mm.
thing, and with the exception of a few places, and I mean very few places, they're not even doing new works.
Well. Okay. So you just said new works, but you also said that the work has to be a draw. It has to be something that people are
Right.
enticed to see. But if you don't make space for
Right.
development, how do those works? How do they get their opportunity to
Well, okay.
rise?
Okay. One of the things, though, we just started this whole discussion. I'm sorry to cut you off. We started this whole
Mhm.
discussion on nobody is willing to talk about the changes that might be necessary. So the development of new work, how we develop them, which, by the way, the old model, which is currently in effect, is we put on a reading of somebody's play that has an interesting idea. And then we say, gee, it was an interesting idea, but it's not finished. Goodbye. And no one ever sees it again. That's not development. That's putting on a reading. And the nonprofits of this country have fallen back into we're not investing in our writers. We may present them, but we're not investing. And the audience, and I find this, if you bring in an audience to a reading of a play the first time and they go, that was really interesting. I know it needs some work. Really liked it. And then 6 months later, you invite them back to see the new version. And then 6 months after that, the next version. By the time it gets to the point that they have to pay for a ticket, they're going to show up. My belief. But that's one version of what might work. But we're not even talking about these things. You,
Yeah, I wasn't asking because anything was contradictory. It is, how do you make space for all of this if, on the one hand, we're arguing that the infrastructure of a nonprofit organization is arguably unnecessary. It's about the work. And that we should put more effort into the work, but you can't support the work without the infrastructure. And yes, I know there are organizations that are a bit bloated administratively, but we also see how hard it is to operate on a shoestring budget with minimal staff, because some of the things that Broadway has is Broadway will hire spot on, right? And then they will just handle all of your PR and marketing. And you can also hire like Bespoke or Foresight, and they will handle they're your company manager. And so basically, you're the producer bringing this show together, but you outsourced all of the elements of bringing the show together. Whereas at a nonprofit, it is, we're the ones. We are all of those elements.
Here's a question for you. And by the way, in regional theater, and this has to be part of the discussion, you don't have the same pool of staffing and talent and crew and everything else that you have in a place like New York City. That cannot be it's understated. That is unbelievably important. On the other hand, if you don't have to commit to your production manager being on every show, and maybe when you run into somebody else at another theater who's having 3 months off, you're allowed to hire them to come, and then in a sense, that's a form of interviewing them for the job, right? So you then find out who you want to work with again. Maybe a director has someone he or she really likes to work with. If you have a staff member, they can't. So there are both positives and negatives to having a full-time staff. The other part, which I totally agree with you on, if you want the infrastructure that helps you do what you're going to do, on the other hand, if you're only doing 2 or 3 shows a year, you don't need a year-round staff. And that means you got to figure out, why are we only doing 2 or 3 shows a year? Most likely money. And then if you don't have the money, why do you exist? Or, I'm going to argue one other point before I let you go and jump on me, which you're allowed to do.
Yes.
Someone said to me the other day, I was talking to a long-time, very respected is the wrong word, very successful Broadway producer. And he said the producer has one job. The rest of it comes with the job. It's raising money. An executive director of a nonprofit, one job, raising money. Yes, there's a lot more they do, a lot more decisions they make. The president of the board of directors of a nonprofit, one job, make sure it's funded. Well, now the question is, if you turn to the board and you hand them a budget of, I'm picking a number, $500,000 for the year, but you really needed 750,000 to do it correctly, whose fault is that? Now,
Mm.
they may not be able to raise 750,000, but if your board understands why you need it, they will try. And maybe you end up
Hmm.
with 610,000 and you do the best you can, you adjust your schedule. All of this is the thinking. We're so caught up in the day-to-day of putting a show on and the crisis management. How do we pay the heating bill in our theater? How do we keep it vacuumed? Who's printing the tickets? How come we didn't get this advertisement into the newspaper? And you have people who have brains who are doing the little shit. We can't create if we're constantly, and by the way, if you don't have $500,000, then you do less. But you don't necessarily have to do it year round. You can do it over the summer. You say, we have Barrington Stage, by the way, God bless them. They were, for the first, I think, 8 years, only a summer theater.
Mm.
Right? You do, and they used a high school auditorium. They didn't even have their own theater for the first 10 years of their existence. Now, it still costs money. You create what you can within your area in order to put on great theater, not good theater, great theater. And I still hold every nonprofit to the highest standard, and I expect them to get there. Or else, and doesn't they want my money as a donation? Prove to me you're better than the guy next door to you.
Mm.
That may be unfair, but that's the way I think. Okay, I've been pontificating and arguing. We haven't talked in a couple of months, so I'm getting it all off my chest.
No, I appreciate it. Um, yeah, I, I would argue, for the need for full time staff for some things, like you know, grant making cycles.
Good,
You
very good
can't
point.
just, you can't just hire them 5 minutes before the cycle begins, because then it's going to be a rush job to try to get
Mm-hmm.
proposals out in time, and so that requires a lot of research. And so, like, for us, like, we have consistent meetings with our grant writer and continuously exploring options. The other thing is, we're not just thinking about this is the other thing that's a little different about Broadway. Broadway is focused on one show, and the goal is trying, for one, all the work in advance to try to get to opening night, and then how to sustain that as long as possible. Whereas for a theater, and whether this is right or wrong, is that a theater arguably should be planning its next 3 to 5 years. And so this staff has to be year round, because they can't just think about what's current. They have to think about what's coming
Well,
in the
I can't
future.
argue. I have no argument with what you just said, except if that isn't working for your theater, you need to rethink
Mm,
it. We need to open our thoughts to different ways of operating. Maybe
yeah.
you have three people that are full time, and everyone else, as hard as that is show by show. Maybe. I'm not
Mm,
saying you do. I'm just saying maybe to start
yeah.
out with. Maybe there's only one person in charge, and they're doing the grant writing, directing the shows. We're really at the beginning of everything, right? I know things improve, but I'll be honest with you, at two of the theaters I worked at, the people in charge of promotion and subscription audiences and marketing, they had no idea what they were doing. They were being trained by the artistic director, who I don't
Mm,
know had the most knowledge either way. So you just hired them because you only had so much money, and they're the only ones who were willing to work for that
yeah.
money. So why not say, okay, I'm going to have a professional for 1 month and I'm going to plan the entire thing and give it a, and the rest of the time I do it myself. I don't have the answer. I'm still waiting for a group of professional people. You and I sitting here, give us a month and you and I could come up with the answers for some theater company, not for all of them. But no one's doing that on a regular
So
basis. And by the,
while we're planning, we're draining our
yeah,
savings buying lottery
yeah, there you
tickets.
go. Well, that works sometimes. By the way,
Come on,
by the way,
Powerball.
though, one of the things that we learned from the New York Shakespeare Festival and from Barrington Stage is where the show 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee.
Putnam
That's
County
where it
Spelling Bee.
started when I
Yeah.
was there, and it went to Broadway, and then
It's Parfait, Mitch.
yeah,
It's Parfait.
that's and just as long as he taps those letters out on the floor. Um, But the bottom line for that was the institution will continue to make some money from that show for a very, very, very long time, if not forever. And
Mhm.
the New York Shakespeare Festival, when they ended up with a chorus line or Hamilton, they part of their business model was we have a process to make more money from the hits to help us do the experimental stuff. Why is that not part of, I mean, not every theater has that, nor the ability. But if you're in a little black box somewhere and you end up with a hit, if you need to have in the back of your mind a plan. What do we do? And I will use, for example, when I was a mere tot of 27, I
Mhm.
directed a what was called a showcase here in New York. Of it was a revival, but it was a first revival, and we were a massive hit. The critics, they we had a press agent friend of mine who got all the critics to show up, and they adored it. We were sending away people every night. It was one of those situations, and it was very exciting. And people walked up to me and said, "I'm willing to put money if you want to move this to an off Broadway theater." And at 27, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand how you budget, how you get it. It never occurred to me to have a hit. So that show, even though people offered me money, closed and never went anywhere. That
Mhm.
shouldn't be the case for nonprofit institutions. They need to have, whether it's we're taking 1 month off every year and all we're going to do is brainstorm. There's got to be more than we're just getting the next show up. And we just paid for our production assistants that we like, but really are inexperienced. It's got to be. I don't know what it is. Every theater is different.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia has a different audience than Indiana, right? So I don't want. It's not
Mhm.
across the board, but they're all trying to follow the same model, and it's not working because everyone's begging for money.
Yeah. I do think what's unfortunate on all of the sides is that all of this takes time.
Yes.
And I think that that's why it's hard to pull away from having dedicated staff because, like us, for example, if this season our production manager is
Mm-hmm.
part time, and it's like once we get closer to tech and opening and so on, they put in more hours, but it's really the between the shows where we really need that
Right.
mindset, that someone in that headspace to kind of sort things out before we get into the swing of things again. And so that's something that what we're learning about. It's like you can't just, if you could just hire everybody for each production, how soon, like our stage manager comes in for a prep week, but we might need our team a couple of weeks before we even get into rehearsal, and so that
But that's
becomes
but there are two
an
things you
expense.
said that I think are very important, and you're right. You're right.
Mhm.
You didn't say there's nothing in there to argue with. First of all, the time thing. just because one of your leaders, executive director, president of the board, artistic director, manager, whoever they are, has ideas in their head, it can't happen unless they are all willing to sit down together because they know they want to create a better institution. If you can't get them all, you don't have all the right people. And most places don't. But that's part of why picking a board, and it all starts with an artistic director or somebody. The other part of this, um, which you brought up about staffing, I know that the theater that I worked for that was just summer theater, I've worked for one of those. I mean, they had three people year round. Everybody else was just the summer. Well, there are a number of places you advertise if you want to be an intern, if you want to be a company manager, if you want to be work in the finance office, whatever it is. We made a list of the staff needed. Then we figured out what date do we need them by. Now, of course, we had a bookkeeper that was there year round because you have to have that, but that was part time, right? Um, but otherwise, we would then say, okay, in order to staff our crew for an entire summer, we need to advertise in Art Search, which is part of TCG, in February. You can't advertise before February because no one's looking. We have to start auditions in March because in order to lock them in, you're not finding the right people in 1 week. Everything was, and the people with experience, I mean, I learned a lot because I came into an institution that already existed. And they'd say, no, 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 we go after the company manager on this date. And we need you to write the ad with as few words as possible and come up with a system and make sure Art Search and wherever else posts it on such and such date. So I didn't have to think that. I could suggest changes, but they had it worked out. And yes, it's exhausting when you realize there are three crew members you don't have in place and you're about to start. And then that's a little bit of crisis management and you panic a little bit. But not only that, when do we start looking for housing for out of town people that we used to bring in because it's a summer theater? And you can't ask a Donna McKechnie from a chorus line to just walk into a dorm room. You have to make sure she has a house. When is it appropriate to start knocking on doors? Who do you ask? How do you meet the preacher at the local church and say, do you have someone that goes away for the summer? How do I mean, my brain would explode if I think of all the different things we had to do. And that's a wrong process. You see, you don't understand. I know how to do that. Yes, it's very exciting when you accomplish it, but when it was all over, that's wrong. And I don't know how to fix that unless I have all the key people willing to sit down and talk it through with me. Because by myself, I could walk up to the artistic director and say, I think we should apply for the company manager 2 weeks earlier. And she'd go, okay. She didn't care. But I can only do that little change, right? Instead of maybe we need that one position year round. Maybe they should do this. Maybe,
yeah.
We didn't have those larger discussions. And we were all begging for money year round. And that's the part, I know the government, if the government gave us more money, forget it. It's not going to happen. Hopefully we put the pressure on the government to give us a little more, but it's not going to solve the problem. So unless we're going to ask nonprofit regional theaters to pay $150 a seat, which maybe they have to start doing. Broadway, my cousin just went to this drama run by a nonprofit, but in a Broadway theater. The cheapest price was $289 because it had a star in it. The cheapest. I'm not going to go see that show. But they got it. They filled the house. Something's
Yeah.
wrong. We have to be talking about this.
People are I think people are impulsive, and this is kind of like the mindset of like people are more experiential now, and so I think they are more willing to pay those prices because having the experience, especially for the younger generations, they've been uh,
Mm-hmm.
exploring this data and having research on that. We're more about experiences than we are about hoarding, you know, because we didn't grow up in a time where everything was so scarce and we had to cling to it like families did over
Mm-hmm.
the years. And so now it's like, well, I mean, I've even said this. I'm like, if my house catches on fire, I just need one of my devices that connects me to my digital world.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I lose
Right.
that, then I feel like everything else is replaceable. But I can't, that's why all of my digital
But
assets are backed up in
but you
multiple
see, for
places.
me, talking about your generation, what might
Talking about my
oh God, now
generation. That's it. We can't
you're
afford the rest.
dating. Yeah, please stop now. And Universal's going to pull it back anyway. From right, you can't use any music now. But the
Is this Emery? There are 8 lawyers at the door.
you owe $14.92 in royalties.
I'm sorry. I was on a plan with a company. It's supposed to cover all of that. No, you have to pay
Yeah,
ASCAP individually
everything
for
through
all of these.
Spotify. Hopefully that system will change soon. But your
Yeah.
generation, in my opinion, you do have different sensibilities at the theater. I'm not talking about Broadway. Let's put that aside. The
Hmm.
theater has not been willing to discuss. And here's a trick. I'm certainly not in your generation. And what you're looking for, your generation may be looking for, would still excite me too. It's not going to turn me
Hmm.
away to have an experiential moment for a half an hour or an hour before the show and have the show only be an
Yeah.
hour. Who
Hmm.
is thinking about what to try? I know I'm harping on the same thing. I just want us to have the discussion. I don't. I
Yeah.
know that if I went to the theater the other night, a brand new venue and a very interesting topic. I don't want to badmouth any show, okay? Because I would. I was bored out of my mind. I thought it was sophomoric. Um, and they were charging a decent ticket price. But um, what what do you do to take that and say it was still worth going to? And for me to come out of my house and get off my streaming, I'm watching some phenomenal dramas and other shows on streaming and TV. What's going to get
Hmm.
me out? Um, you know,
Yeah.
um, we know that Disney World does it. We can get you to Wicked. We can get you to Lion King. But what else? And again, this is a discussion. I am not of your generation. I'd like to hear what would do it. And then I will have some ideas of my own. And you may go, oh, let's try that or not. I don't know. But I
Yeah.
know that the people I talk to at some of these theater companies are not discussing this.
Well, I one thing I would say is that there are a lot of young people who always want to do something. So it's not that people are just set on mainlining a past series
Mainlining.
that is already. Yeah, well, they're like, I'm gonna settle in for 8 hours. I'm gonna get season one and
Mm-hmm.
under my belt, and then like they make it seem like it's
Yeah.
work. Like we're so behind. We're only on season three. We gotta get caught up. I'm like, why do you have to
Yeah.
do any of that? But there are young adults who want to go out and do something social, However, if the consensus of that group is not saying let's go take in some theater,
Well,
then
that's not going to
you
happen no
know,
matter what.
I know, and they're often looking for like let's go sit at a bar and
Hmm.
spend on
And
overpriced drinks, and those
I'm
two
not trying to
drinks
get
could
them.
have brought them to the
There's
theater.
still enough theater folk that love it.
True. But I'm just saying that because we are convinced that everyone who used to come to the theater is checking out over the streaming options. But the thing is, there are still people who want to get out and be
Good point.
social. And so if we know that people who want to be social still exist, then all of your other valid comments come back into
Hmm.
play, saying like this, what you're bringing to the stage has to be a draw. You have to find a way to entice us, and it doesn't mean that it already has to be a success. It means you have to excite us. So you can't just say here's our graphic, it's fake.
Yeah.
And constantly blast all over your social media, please buy tickets, get them while they're hot. It's like they're not even hot. Like, what if you have to say get them while they're hot? They're not
You're
hot,
absolutely right.
you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you have to. So we've been talking about this too. It's like we have to let people in. So one of the notes I put in, we have to create more opportunities for patrons to engage with your organization,
Yeah.
thus building
Well,
stronger
and may
relationships.
I add to that, and this is a personal thing. It may not be the taste of every theater company, but
Hmm.
when I get to talk to what I'll call a non-theater folk, right, that live upstate New York, downstate Pennsylvania, anywhere
Hmm.
around San Diego, they have 3 theaters there, whoopee, and they're great theaters, but they have 3. We have 150 here in New York. Um,
Hmm.
that when I talk to them, the thing that excites them the most is when they got to participate in putting theater on, even if it was amateurish.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and it's not about having classes, although for some people that's something. What can we do that says be a part of our productions or be a part of something, not our exact professional productions, but be a part of something like our productions in our theater so that you're part of our community. And then you never know when somebody shows up with something out of the blue that excites people. And that's happened a few times. Some of the big hits came out of the blue. That's
Mm.
rare, but it happens. And if the
Yeah.
local community decides the play that my church put on, which was about Jesus and about Genesis, and that I left there on a high. That was exciting. That's still valid theater. We poo poo that in the theater, like, oh, another story about the Bible. It doesn't matter if it excited your audience and they were part of it. We're not allowing these people to use our spaces. And it's like, I'm different. Let me acknowledge, I am not religious. Okay. My religion is theater and music, right?
Yeah.
But these are good people who want to be part of the process and use what's in their creative head. And we're not letting them, we're keeping them away.
Mm.
So you have to go to a church which has no acoustics, or no stage and I, I'm sorry, I think we've done wrong. I think it is time to say we've got the highest standards for the professional work we do, but everyone is welcome here, and let's do some of your stuff too, or work with us. It's like having my interns. We had 100% equity actors, we had a great director, everyone had a resume, and we had 2 interns. What they learned in a month, I would have killed for when I was their age. And they went away and they are thankful for it. Why shouldn't we be offering that to anyone in the community? Senior citizens who have nothing else to do. Why do they have to go to a senior center? Forgive me, I'm being very stereotypic, and play bingo. they
Hmm.
should be able to come to the theater and participate and work with younger
Yeah.
kids. And but we, and I know we have educational programs, all good, but we can do
Hmm.
so much more.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea to think of, like we are. I feel like there is a broader conversation about community engagement, but it's really about how can they engage with the work we're
Right.
trying to sell. And it's not about how do we just open our doors to the community. And you're right. It should be like we shouldn't be trying to nickel and dime off somebody who wants to do a
Oh,
reading.
at
You
all.
know,
Should be free of
like it's
charge anytime the theater's open. That
you want to do a reading, we're in the business of
right.
play development. Absolutely, we can give you a
Yeah.
Monday. You know, because and someone will selfishly think, yes, if we have them in there, it's an opportunity to tell that audience what this organization does beyond beyond hosting for this reading. They do have an opportunity to say there's so much more here. How many of you have been here for the first time, and so on? Like, we really hope you take an opportunity to figure out what else we have
And you
to
may
offer.
find
And
hidden talent in, but
yeah.
I have to go a step further. Money. There's a
Hmm.
nonprofit here in New York which for a while was offering discounted rehearsal space. Believe me, in New York, that's
Hmm.
important with the prices we
Yeah.
are charged here. They were so good to me and to other people. I made a year end donation to an organization I had
Mm.
no other connection to, isn't at my level of working professionally. I had nothing to do with. They got my money because they helped me. They let me know I was welcome there and they helped save me money. You want to get
Mm.
some membership fees, some subscription from people, you want to involve them, they will come up with money if they have it. And the people who don't, great. That's what theater's about. You just, you
Yeah.
don't have to, it shouldn't, music industry, it's a horrible thing. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the thing to do was to go out and buy your own recording equipment and set up your own studio in your basement. Minimum cost for setting up a decent recording studio is $44,000 in the 1980s. I know
Mm.
tons of people who did it. If you think they got anything out of that, so being in the arts costs us money when we're trying to put out music and theater. This is great. You have an institution. We have a membership of 1,000, not 150 that come to see the show. That's what we should be aiming for. And they'll just
Yeah.
give us money at some point. They will.
And honestly, with the housing market, people can't afford the space that they
Mm-hmm.
desire. And so, these organizations should realize that about society and say, like, I think it makes sense to be like, you live in our neighborhood, want to have a birthday party here? You may not have enough space at your home, but you can come here because you're part of
I'm
the
gonna
community. And we have to find ways to have people feel like, that local theater is an extension of your, the offerings you have in your neighborhood. And if you look at it that way, there's a whole lot that you can do here as well, not just
right.
us
And
in the
I
space.
wish I felt comfortable embarrassing a particular theater here in New York, nonprofit, but they have a big lobby, and certainly we understand while shows are going on, they need the lobby.
Oh,
That one.
that one.
If you want to put on a wedding, a bar mitzvah, obviously it's just the party part of it. If you want
Yeah.
to invite people and have a corporate event for I think it's a 4 hour window. For a 4 hour window, I don't care if it's New York City. They charge $60,000 for 4 hours. The building is open anyway. Now,
Wow.
It's like, I get it. You don't want to have a lot of that. So come up with rules. We're only
Mm-hmm.
going to do this. We're only going to do that. That's fine. But come on, tell me that,
Yeah.
there's this 95-year-old lady in my building. I'd love to give her a party, invite everyone over there. I can't
Mm-hmm.
go. It's across the street. Why?
Well, that's the other point I was going to make. If they are making it accessible to someone, but then they are introduced to someone with deep pockets, this is when they get conflicted and they're like, "We're leaving money on the table. We could be asking for much
Right.
more here instead of like just making the space accessible." Like I know that when I first arrived at Exile, I was thinking like, okay, well, you know, what do we need to secure our lease
Mm.
agreement? And let's make sure that we can get that from our rental program. It is kind of in the mindset, but then thinking about that, it's like, oh, okay, then our rate doesn't have to be extravagant if we are budgeting, saying like every little bit, you know, makes it easier for us to exist in
And
the
by the way,
space.
one of the other things, and again, I'm not making this stuff up. There are organizations doing this. It's not like I've
Hmm.
got all these thoughts in my head and I haven't seen someone succeed with it. Um, the organization that gave us the discounted studios, you have to be a
Hmm.
member. So you pay annual dues, which is very low, and then you have
Mm.
access to their programs, of which still cost you
Yeah.
more money, but they're sincerely
Yes.
discounted. That's a reason to join a theater or join a company. And I cannot tell you how
Yeah.
much money I was able to save on behalf of these developmental writers. It's not like I personally made the money. It saved us trying to help these people. And they got to see their
Yeah.
shows developed and performed because of these discounts. We never could have afforded to do it any other way. I will, and now I donate every year because I know
Mm.
what they're capable of, and they're still doing good stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I just it's hard to imagine. It's the same thing. To be honest with you, I'm one of those people who argue, why aren't the churches taking in more immigrants? Why aren't they dealing with homeless people? It's like, you're not paying taxes. You're there with the spirit of, whether it's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. The spirit's supposed to be, we help people. And if they do, I don't hear much about it. Certainly not in my neighborhood, maybe in some of the smaller towns, which would be nice. But that's what we're supposed to be doing. And now we're a nonprofit theater. Let's do our homework. And it'll come
Yeah.
back to us. I really do believe that. On that
Hmm.
note,
Well, yes, I hope those conversations keep going, and I hope they evolve to some of the talking points that we reference here. Um, because yeah, I think we can't keep tapping our community to get what little bit of money they have because a grant maker, you know,
and wouldn't
changed
you
their
think a
process.
grant maker would acknowledge how you're offering the space to the community? That, because now you
Hmm.
have educational, social, you have all political. You're involved in a ton of different activities, not just theater. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to imply it's easy, but if you don't try,
Art isn't
yeah, thank you. We had to
easy.
do it. Sondheim made it to our podcast.
Hello, Sondheim. You've been well. Yes. So there were a ton of other things we wanted to talk about because we were playing catch up, but of course, we'll have more episodes so we can talk
Yes.
about
Uh,
Titanic and Little Shop
Titanic.
joining the union.
Titanic. Oh,
Titanic.
okay.
That's what I said. Joining the union, joining
Yeah.
IATSE and
Big,
so on,
big
and
deal.
we can uh, we can talk about how excited we were about that Wicked trailer in a future episode. But that's the business.
Of
A theater of working title. I'm Darnell
Mitch
Radford,
Weiss.
and we will see you at the theater.
Yay.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Business of Theater, a working title, with Darnell Radford and Mitch Weiss. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the podcast with a friend, colleague, or give us some social media love. This podcast is an Emory production. Visit us online at em3ry.com/TBOT. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at em3ryotm.